Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Habari. No, we saw you yesterday night. We know you have the energy. Good morning. All right. I feel like we need to warm up slightly. Just look to the person next to you. Just ask them, where have you been the last 4 years? Did you get an answer? Did you get an answer? All right. Second thing, tell them, welcome to the greatest city in Africa. Well, I'm a little biased. Tiny disclaimer. A lot of you were promised sunshine. So what we lack in good weather, we make up for in hospitality. So you take what you can out of Kenya. So welcome. We're about to have a fantastic time today. My name is Georgie Ndirango. I work with the MasterCard Foundation and also a member of the Now Generation Network at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. So we're definitely all going to have fun. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, distinguished guests, board members, honorable members, entrepreneurs, state and non-state actors. I know Mo said no protocols observed, but please, because I want to be here next year, all protocols observed. Good morning. Now, today's session is a particularly interesting one. First of all, let's please give 2 rounds of applause. Don't give any yet. 1, congratulations to the former president of Niger, His Excellency Mahamadou Issoufou, for receiving the Ibrahim Prize for his contribution to good governance in Africa. Please, a warm round of applause. Congratulations. We'll be tackling the conversation on good governance and what that means in different parameters. Of course, a lot of things have changed since the last time we were in a physical convening. COVID came, and that came with a few layers of conversation and what exactly it means to have Africa push its own agenda and cement its place on the continent. Second round of applause. The work did not stop when we last physically convened. So let's please give a warm round of applause to the foundation team, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation team, for putting this together and maintaining the momentum, and now we're physically back seeing each other. Right, so throughout the program today, we'll discuss Africa's way to the world, what role different players have, particularly young people. Mo is very fond of young people and has made sure that young people come to the table, not being talked at, but talked with, and made sure that, they also hold the mantle in terms of where Africa is trying to position itself. So, without taking too long, please allow me to call on stage to give the welcome and then introduce the next speaker for the keynote. The founder and chair of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, a good dancer, and an even better accountability partner for the continent, Mo Ibrahim.
Thank you very much. Good morning, our friends, and I hope you are energetic after the dancing yesterday. We had a lot of fun. Today we're gonna do some work, and we're gonna have some serious discussions. Every year when we have our annual meeting, we focus on one subject and one subject only. We do that because these are important issues and need really good discussions. We do a couple of things. We produce always a book. That book, we call it Facts and Figures, which explain all the issues, all the data about the subjects are being discussed during that day. Why we do that? Because we believe data should drive policies. It's very important to have data. In order to use the data, we need the facts. So to build our discussion on the facts. And that's why I believe you have in your email box, and maybe you have a printed copy of all the data, all the information about the subjects to be discussed today. In previous events, we had agriculture, African agriculture as an issue, big issue in Africa. We had one about African youth, important issue, our African young people, this tsunami of young people coming to Africa. What we're going to do with it? Are we really serving them? Last time we had a meeting, we had a very interesting discussion about the public servants. Nobody talks about the people who are supposed to deliver health, education, etc. Who are those guys? What we're doing to them, the nurses, are the unsung soldiers in Africa doing tough work without proper pay, without proper training, etc. And that focus on the position of those people who deliver. How can we deliver the services without that army of civil servants, administrators, etc.? This year, the world is changing around us. I think everybody knows that. We have all the previous assumptions are being broken now. We see different powers rising, tensions, camps being formed, and where exactly our place here? We have US here, we have China here, we have Europe here, and then we have the middle powers who suddenly found a voice and influence. You see countries like Turkey, countries like Iraq, we see the Gulf countries. Who would have thought 10 years ago that some of these countries will become key players in the international stage? So things are really changing around us, and where are we? What is our relationship with those people? And everybody coming here, poking a finger in Africa, are they good fingers or bad fingers? We need to assess that. So we need to have a position understanding of this. So the discussion today is going to focus on all these issues. We, Africa and the world, and the world, what do you offer the world? And what is the offer of the world for us? And we need to understand all this stuff. So we're going to have this discussion today, and I have no better person to open this discussion than the chairperson of the African Union, who have to deal with a lot of these issues. And I'm very delighted that he was able to arrive here to do this. My brother, Moussa Faki, please give us the honor of opening this.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis, c'est vraiment un plaisir et un privilège d'avoir tout ce monde, éminentes personnalités politiques et diplomatiques, intellectuels, universitaires, jeunes, femmes, pour pouvoir, pendant cette semaine, Mo Ibrahim, réfléchir ensemble sur la situation dans le continent africain. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis, je voudrais à l'entame de mon propos me réjouir tout d'abord de l'honneur qui m'est fait de prendre part en tant que premier orateur à ce forum de grand intérêt pour le continent africain. Il constitue en effet un moment de mouvement des idées qu'appelle toute velléité sérieuse visant une authentique poursuite intellectuelle du relèvement et de renaissance africaine. que ses organisateurs, en premier lieu l'homme dont la fondation organisatrice porte le désormais prestigieux nom Mo Ibrahim, en soient remerciés. De ces remerciements, j'en ai dit hier quelques mots qui viennent du cœur. Au regard de l'extrême diversité thématique à laquelle s'ouvrent les portes de notre forum Global Africa, j'avoue que je me trouve dans une certaine perplexité, sinon un dilemme. Quel thème choisir? Quel angle privilégier? Quelle entrée plus stimulante que tout autre? Je me suis finalement hasardé à un propos liminaire articulé autour de 4 observations. J'espère que ces 4 observations pourront servir de réceptacle pour répondre aux 3 préoccupations sur la place de l'Afrique dans le monde, la place du monde en Afrique, tout en brossant à grands traits nos espérances dans un monde nouveau. La première observation porte sur les narratifs. Le président Ruto en a parlé avec éloquence hier soir. Les narratifs dominants aujourd'hui dans de nombreux cercles intellectuels sur l'Afrique. Afrique des crises, Afrique du terrorisme, Afrique des résurrections des identités ethniques et tribales meurtrières, Afrique des désastres écologiques, Afrique des précarités des infrastructures, Afrique de la corruption et de la malgouvernance, Afrique pourvoyeuse des bateaux d'immigrants candidats à la mort, Afrique des contre-performances, bref, Afrique de toutes les grands-mères des négativités. Je récuse naturellement ces narratifs, non par motivation idéologique, ni par nationalisme biaisé et étroit, mais simplement par la force des faits qui s'étalent sous nos yeux. À la vérité, j'avais cru au recul de ces narratifs qui, à un moment, nourrit les discours injustement qualifiés d'africanistes, l'afro-pessimisme. Je découvre à l'expérience qu'il est encore bien pugnace. Je ne vais pas ici, rassurez-vous, m'adonner à l'exercice fastidieux de ressasser les éclaircies qui montrent que ces narratifs obscurcis par l'ignorance, l'incurie intellectuelle et la déficience des vues prospectives est en lui-même impensé. Le potentiel humain, par d'1,4 milliard d'habitants, géologique, énergétique, hydraulique, halieutique, forestier, touristique, culturel, artistique, sportif, en Afrique porte un démenti cinglant au logiciel de la dépréciation africaine. Tout le monde connaît les 3 chiffres. Celui que de 2030 à la fin du siècle actuel, la population africaine va doubler, que sa jeunesse sera la moitié de la jeunesse du monde, ainsi que l'Afrique, l'Amérique latine et l'Europe vont dans la même période perdre 490 millions de personnes. Il en résulte un potentiel incommensurable d'esprit d'initiative, de créativité et de décuplement productif dans tous les domaines d'activités humaines. Les performances africaines, attestées par notre capacité de résilience, je prends l'exemple de la Covid-19, ajoutent à notre fierté de savoir que l'Afrique, contrairement à ses détracteurs, est le continent d'avenir et le siècle en cours sera certainement le siècle de l'Afrique. Ceci dit, qui peut ignorer ou minimiser les défis auxquels l'Afrique est confrontée? Défis de déstabilisation et de changement non constitutionnels du gouvernement, défis de changement climatique, défis de précarité d'infrastructures, défis d'intégration économique, défis d'industrialisation, défis alimentaires et de souveraineté nutritionnelle. J'en vais pour exemple le cas du Niger sous le leadership de notre frère le président Issoufou. Je suis du Tchad, voisin du Niger. Je disais hier au président Mamadou Issoufou que j'étais déjà ministre des Affaires étrangères quand il a accédé en 2011 à la présidence du Niger. J'ai eu la chance d'être à leur côté, lui, feu le maréchal Idriss Déby, feu Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, le président du Burkina et le président du Mauritanie. J'ai assisté à la gestation et à la naissance du G5. Je sais qu'avec de la volonté,
I was there, and then we can, as somebody has said.
pourtant, chers amis,
And yet, dear friends, when we
dont l'irrésolution entraîne l'ajournement du relèvement de tous les autres et les déficits en matière de leadership. Il suffit de regarder autour de nous.
to look around
Des pays, certes, en nombre
the countries now,
réduit, ont pris le chemin de l'émergence. Là où le leadership a montré quelques qualités éthiques et un peu de sens stratégique, les pays ainsi dirigés ont relevé la tête et se retrouvent aujourd'hui en pleine ascension. La question du leadership, objet de ma deuxième observation, renvoie à une autre qui aurait pu être une source nourricière de nos moteurs de renaissance. Je vais parler du recul du panafricanisme, ma troisième observation. Non seulement nous avons un peu manqué cette foi en nous et cette flamme qui a porté le message de liberté, d'indépendance et de victoire contre le colonialisme et l'apartheid. La baisse, voire parfois l'extension de cette flamme, a négativement impacté la fibre de solidarité entre nous. Regardez, qui vole au secours des pays du Sahel, où depuis des années, des dizaines, voire des centaines d'êtres humains meurent presque tous les jours. Qui vole au secours de la Libye, en proie à toutes sortes d'interférences dévastatrices. Regardons-nous, paralysés, abasourdis, tétanisés face au drame du Soudan qui sombre dans l'abîme. J'ai une pensée pieuse à nos frères au Soudan, qui depuis quelques jours vivent la mort et la désolation. La déficience en matière de leadership susmentionnée est intimement liée à celle de la solidarité. L'un est le résultat.
one is the result of the other, if you want. One is generating the other. Then we can draw from that a flame of Pan-Africanism, a task that will be a task for a revived intelligentsia of Africa. Thank you again, President Isufu. Our foundation is working on that, and we are ready to support your efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, my fourth observation is on the decline of multilateralism. The decline of multilateralism did not start with the war between Russia and Ukraine. This has only shown that it has reached a certain sense, a culminating point. The explosion of the pandemic of COVID-19 had already sent a very strong signal. These two phenomena, in fact, have joined and combined. The first is the observation manifested itself with that has exposed the vanity of the international community. We have noted how Europe has behaved when it was the case of Italy in the dark hours of that country. As a member of C7 and G20, of course, a member of the European Union, what it went through in the pandemic. The second one, despite all the statements and the meetings, the lack of financial resources, medicine and all, and what has the world given to Africa? Were it not for the surprising capacity of resilience of Africa, Africa would have been a universal hecatomb. Somebody told me that we should rather look for bulldozers because you will have problems to bury the millions of Africans who will perish with COVID-19. Thank God, maybe in our gene, in our DNA, we have more resistance and resilience. From there, in fact, we have added a lot to this net of negativity. The question that arises today is not how to help Africa, but how Africa can help the world.
Sa flore, je dirais sa faune,
Its flora, its fauna, and the Congo Basin has become the first lung of the world. And the territory of Africa, in fact, has the largest kilometers of arable land which are not exploited, and which, of course, encompasses and has more rare materials. It is not out of vanity.
tort de croire que la
You are wrong in thinking that Africa, by militating for a new multilateralism, is a beggar.
grosse erreur que de
It's a big mistake to think of that.
Si l'Afrique pose la
If Africa is raising the question, it is because it has in its own hands the keys of its own contribution to shaping the world for the benefit of all mankind. Then we have had an additional problem of the exclusion of Africa. The first one in the incongruous action that is in the financing of climate change, while Africa is one of the least polluters of the world. And the Congo Basin, which, as I said, has become the first lung of the world, and is there for climate change. The reform of international financial system and the rise of the emerging countries, which is now unveiling and unfolding that, in fact, we are facing it has become a necessity. With the largest number of members and largest number of programs, Africa is only benefiting only 5 or 6% of the votes in IMF. I'm not talking of the despising exclusion and treatment of Africa. If you look at the UN Security Council, it is indisputable that multilateralism, as it was drawn up after the Second World War, does not correspond to anything to the reality. At least Africa does not find its place. Its present and future interests should be that it should make its own efforts in order to find and pave out its own way. War, and contrary to a known thesis that it is the midwife of history, it is also not a moment of interrogation. In fact, it leads us to think and be more composed. And we, on the eve of a movement of this nature, I am asking the question, and I'm asking you the question, find an answer. Thank you.
Merci pour la contribution, both here and the fantastic work being done within the African Union Commission. Now, we've had the remarks and the context. Let's get into some bit of detailed discussion. The first session is on the role Africa plays in the world and the kind of assets we have: soft skills, hard skills, infrastructure, people, young people. Let me call the panelists. First up, please welcome to the stage His Excellency Yemi Osinbajo, the Vice President of Nigeria. Please take the middle seat, the third seat. That one, yeah. The third one. All right. Next up, Donald Kaberuka, Managing Partner at Southbridge Group and former President of the African Development Bank. Please join us on stage. Followed next by Hafu Ture, who's a technical advisor for the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Promotion of SMEs in Côte d'Ivoire. And Amo Ibrahim Foundation Now Generation Network member. This conversation will be moderated by the ever so brilliant Natasha Kimani from Africa No Filter and also a Now Generation Network member.
Comme Mji Nairobi. My name is Natasha Kimani, and it is my singular honor to be the moderator of this fantastic panel. If the news were to be believed, the only thing that comes from Africa is poverty, corruption, and war. But data tells us different. 6 out of 10 of the fastest growing economies are from Africa. The Congo Basin is the world's first carbon sink, absorbing more carbon than the Amazon. And we all know that Amapiano and Afrobeats is carrying the world's entertainment on its back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to tell a different story. Are you ready? Yes. Thank you very much. Good morning, sir. Hi, ma'am. Great. I'm going to begin with you, Your Excellency. As we all know again, Afrobeats has done incredible work for shifting the narrative about Africa, but we don't seem to be taking the creative economy seriously as a game changer to enabling and being a leverage to ensure that we have socioeconomic development. What are some of the things we can begin doing differently to ensure that we are changing that?
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Your mic on?
Mic.
Is your mic on? Oh, they have a mic. Mic, please.
Yes, sir. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm informed that His Excellency Mayaki will be joining us online. Is that? He was? Apologies for that. Thank you. His Excellency, apologies for that. Yes.
He's back.
He's back? Oh, hello, sir. Hello and welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you, everyone. I think that first, the success of the creative industry in Africa is a phenomenon that many will say happened happily without government, you know, and that it possibly even happened because there was no government. So I think that in many ways, what is important is to see how the creative industry can be supported, and especially entertainment. It's evident that there is a huge amount of talent, and it's evident also that the regulatory environment favors it because there are no impediments, and I'm one for saying that as much as possible, what we should seek to do is to see how we can expand that space as much as possible, support with credit where that is possible, and the sorts of infrastructure that will be helpful. So for example, we in Nigeria have tried to develop what we used to call our old national theater. There are now quite a few studios being built in that location for film as well as for entertainment. The extent to which that would support an industry which obviously has shown such tremendous promise, I think is becoming obvious because there are so many talents that are coming into the entertainment space, and they need the support that they can get. And in many cases, that support can come, especially in the form of infrastructure from the government and credit also from the government. But frankly, I think that things have changed in so many fundamental respects, so that there is a greater independence of the artists, greater independence of the creative people, and they can really function, effectively with little help. So I would say that we should be cautious in not interfering too much, but at the same time, we need to provide infrastructure, we need to provide credit, and the sorts of exposure that they may need.
Your Excellency, building on infrastructure, data shows us that we are still a very undereducated and undertrained continent. Do you think that we're taking enough steps to change that and ensure that we are better prepared for what the future holds for the continent?
Well, I mean, certainly we could do a lot more, and I don't think that it would be right or fair to say that we're doing all we can. But frankly, I think that we should start from the premise of, placing a different vision before our young people. I think education is one thing, but what you see out there and what you hear is really more almost a sense of hopelessness, almost a sense that there isn't any clarity of vision. Where are we headed? And the important narratives about Africa that we need to place before these young people to give them a sense that there's a future, and that the promises that have been made through the years can actually be delivered. So for me, I think the first thing is to get young people to see a different, to see a narrative of Africa that is positive, that is directed at progress, and that takes into account the realities of the world today. And really, young people need to see that and understand that because education is, first, there's a foundation is important for education. And you must also feel that education, formal education in any shape or form, will get you to a certain point. And that's why the vision is important. That's why the vision of hope in particular is important, so that education then begins to make sense. The other point, about education also is the fact that, so when you look at the youth demographic, the tendency, of course, is for us to hear one, if you like, one socio-demographic, which is usually the privileged young people. And of course, I use the word privileged cautiously because these are just young people who have education, either local education or education abroad. Some have college degrees and all of that. But that's really the extent of that privilege. But then there's a huge number of the, rural, peri-urban young people who have no education. And in that demography is a large number of women. And I think that, so even in understanding what sort of educational programs we need to put in place, and even the vision for that educational program, we have to understand that we're dealing with several demographies, and we're dealing with several deficiencies, and they're not the same sorts of deficiencies. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of getting the educational space right. And the final point on that, of course, is that we're in a new place. I mean, where before our very eyes, the world has changed so dramatically, even in the past 10 years or so. There's artificial intelligence, robotics, and all of that, and what that is bringing to the fore. What sort of education makes sense to create, job opportunities today? So I think that this is a time to think through the educational curriculum and to decide how this educational curriculum will be relevant and will deliver the sorts of persons that we want to be delivered, and then create the sorts of opportunities and the skills that will be required for the jobs that will be available.
Thank you. Young Africans need hope. Young Africans need to be reminded that there's a positive aspect to this continent, and we need to tailor education to suit the needs of young Africans. Hafu, you have done extensive work in Côte d'Ivoire, building commerce, advising on industry, and most importantly, SMEs. And there's an ever-increasing narrative that young people need to become entrepreneurs. However, the feedback we constantly get is that, one, you can't entrepreneur yourself out of bad governance. Two, there's no money.
Yes.
Three, there's so many loopholes and things to jump through before you get to become an entrepreneur. And four, you need to be somebody's child or related to somebody to get an opportunity. Are these issues real? Are they a roadblock, and how can we begin changing things? And what have you done in particular in Cote d'Ivoire to begin shifting these negative stereotypes?
Thank you, Natasha. And I wanted to give a special thanks to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and Mo Ibrahim himself for giving center stage to the African youth. I agree. I think there's this new narrative that young Africans need to be entrepreneurs. And I see that there's pros and cons to that. So the first thing is there are a lot of problems, and we've gone and mentioned a lot of them at length. So for these problems, we do need our own Africans to resolve them, right? And the youth do have this creative, innovating energy that allows them to really think through very practical solutions to these problems. But like you said, the enabling environment is just not there. The first point I'm going to talk about, just because of my background, I'm in finance, so the first thing is really how do you start? And this enabling environment really starts with having a little bit of capital, and it starts with love money. So this is the money that you would usually get from a cousin, a parent, and that allows you to have that startup capital. Unfortunately, here on the continent, to give love money, you need to have residual income. And that is just non-existing. And even for the top 10% that are usually the ones that will support these type of initiatives, you find out that they're all entrepreneurs themselves. They all have real estate that they need to invest in. They all have businesses. So they don't move the ladder of going from being entrepreneurs or just high-earning individual to investors. So we don't have that love money capital to start off with. Then you move on to the VC stage, which is where you get startup money or like any type of capital from different institutions. Those institutions also aren't necessarily in place. And when you look at who has been funding a lot of the startups in Africa, you find out that the money is coming from outside. So from Europe or from the United States, where startups are a lot more developed. The issue with that is they will only invest in areas of interest to them, which will be technology or areas that are very important for their own agenda or that they can eventually exploit. So that isn't really serving our people. It's good to bring in this capital, but we also need local capital. Then we move on to the next stage of capital where you will need equity. And equity is a big issue in Africa because a lot of institutions, and having both worked at the African Development Bank, we know this, it's going to be a lot of loan, a lot of microfinance. Institutions tend to do line of credit to banks. To take a loan from a bank, you need to actually be bankable. You need to actually have all of the documentation to go to a bank and ask for a loan. We know that more than 60%, actually 80% of our enterprises are in the informal sector. So how are they supposed to get a bank loan? They need equity. They need people to take stakes in their enterprise and allow them to grow. So we also need long-term instruments, 8 to 10 years, to allow these companies to become mature and become the big giants of tomorrow. So across the financing space, there is an issue with even generating capital to start your firm. And then we do have some great entrepreneurs who do find a way to start. And then they're riddled with policies issues, with really how to even just grow their businesses. And scaling requires a number of infrastructures that needs to be put in place. So after working in the private sector for over 10 years, when I moved back to Cote d'Ivoire, I decided that I wanted to work with the government. And one of the first issues that we tackled within the ministry in charge of SMEs was looking at the enabling environment. What are some of the policies that are in place that are not helping these SMEs grow? And the first one was the fact that we were only looking at the formal SMEs, the one that had a registre de commerce, comme on le dit en Côte d'Ivoire. And that document, a lot of companies don't have it. There's fear of taxation, there's fear of the government just being able to control their businesses. So what we did, the first kind of law policy that I worked on was really kind of decentralizing this whole process of registering a company. So we looked at every single entrepreneur. And when we think of African entrepreneur, we think of the very, sexy ones that are like in fintech or the ones Flutter Wave that are in technology. But literally all of the women selling in the different markets are entrepreneurs. They really are doing what we call just trading and everything else. So we looked at them and we introduced a process that is relatively simple to allow them to identify their business. So we as the government can not only know what they were doing, and we also know how to tax them better. So it was a very single 2% tax for a certain tranche of income. And then the last thing that we did was making sure that even people that were illiterate can go through this process, because we do have to realize that a good part of the population can't read and write. So how do we make sure that they feel comfortable with the process and are registering? So this was the process of moving them from the informal economy to the formal economy. And besides that, I think one of the main things that was a concern for me was really the gap between kind of really what the entrepreneurs needed and what some of the resources that were there that they weren't able to tap into. So I also founded an advisory firm that's called HTS Partners, because we do technical advisory and we help different businesses raise capital, because we realize that there is tons of money out there. One of the last projects I worked on at African Development Bank was raising $100 million for an African agri-fund. And the biggest issue for us that we had at the time was being able to deploy. So you see how there's so many SMEs that are looking for capital, and then you have the capital that is there and it's not getting to them. So how do we do the matching so that there is a link between the pool of capital and the people who need it? That's why we need technical assistance. We need them to understand the process of even putting together an investment memo to be able to receive this capital. We need training. We also need this enabling environment to allow them to have all of the documentation. But on the other end, we also need capital that is easily deployable. A concrete example was we talked about women, and we wanted to make sure that a good part of this fund goes to women that are in the ag space. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a lot of women-owned agricultural companies of a certain, obviously, net income. So we looked at how we can make this easier. So can we work with companies that employ 80% of women? But then when we want to go back to the root of the problem, why can you employ 80% of women and you don't have a woman at the head of the company? So those are some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. I don't have all of the answers, unfortunately, but we do have to think about how we can really go deep on some of these issues to make sure that when we do encourage our African youth, including myself, to go into entrepreneurship, we do give them the tools to succeed.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency Mayaki, do we have him with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Your Excellency, the work that you have done on food systems with the African Union as Special Envoy has transformed how we are working on the continent. But we still see that only 10% of agricultural output comes from the continent, and 47 countries rely on imports. How do we ensure that we begin to continue working towards food security across the continent?
Thank you. Let me start by thanking the Foundation for inviting me. It's a pleasure. And at the start, I would like to thank my brother, Mohamedou Issoufou, for receiving the Mo Ibrahim Foundation Prize. So that said, 3 quick issues. I think I would like to go back to the issue of the narrative, which was mentioned by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, because I think it's crucial. Behind every narrative, there is a strategy. When we had the very negative narrative in the 90s, it was followed by structural adjustment programs. When we had the more positive narratives at the beginning of, in the 2000s, it was followed by huge foreign direct investment. When we have this negative narrative now, there is a strategy behind it. So we need to unpack and decode that strategy. That's the first point, and I wanted really to insist on it. I'll come to the issue of food. But the second point I wanted to mention, linked to the question of leadership. Mo was referring to data. We have 2 striking cases. One is Central African Republic, the other one is Botswana. I will not go into the details, but they look alike quite well as countries. And they came to independence not at the same time, but roughly at the same time. When Botswana came to independence, it had a GDP of $400 per capita, the same as Central African Republic. 25 years after, Botswana multiplied its GDP per capita by 20. And Central African Republic divided its GDP per capita by 2. And be mindful of the fact that Botswana is one of the most egalitarian society in the continent. So you have two divergent strategies, one which was based on institutional leadership and the institutional quality, and a strong quality in terms of leadership, and the other one, well, I will not comment. So these are Africans in the same continent with two radically different examples. So Africa is diverse, and countries can be classified in roughly two groups. Now, point number 3, regarding your question, the problem of food insecurity in Africa is not a problem of production. It's a problem of poverty. When you have the money to buy food, you access food. But when you don't have the money to buy food and the cost of food is high, you cannot have food. So it's very important to evidently mention all the frameworks that we have designed, especially at the African Union level, in order to boost production, productivity, transform small-scale farmers in micro, small, and medium entrepreneurs, look at food sovereignty issues. It's very important. But the issue of food will not be solved until there is a structural transformation of our economies. Because the main issue there is an issue of poverty. The poor don't have access to food, but you and I and all of us in this room, we have access to food. So poverty is the critical issue. And that's where the concept of food systems becomes important, because it doesn't look only at production, it looks at many other sectors which have to do with infrastructure, with health, nutrition, etc., education, and so on. So now, what situation are we in? The biggest problem Africa will face in the next 20, 25 years is that we will need to feed 1 billion more people, and we are the most insecure in terms of food in the world. So feeding 1 billion more people, whilst our extreme poverty has increased, will really be a challenge. And that challenge needs to be tackled now. We will continue to produce, but we might be in a situation where we produce for others and we don't feed our population. And there comes the concept of food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is about looking at food security as a national security issue. And my last point is that we will not be able to solve this problem if we do not have a governance of regional integration which is adapted to that challenge. So it's the regional solutions that will help us solve the national problems of food insecurity that we are facing. And let me stop here.
Thank you. Some take-homes from his wonderful comments. Yes, thank you. Behind every narrative, there's a strategy. And food security is not an issue of production, rather an issue of poverty. Mr. Kaberuka, as Special Envoy to the African Union on financing, we're all quite keen to hear, where are we? What next? Over to you, kind sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, let me say how privileged I am to sit with these two people, my friend Mayaki. Vice President Osinbanje and I have known each other for some time. I want to tell you this gentleman has done a very good job in his country. I'm not sure we have seen the last of him, but it's for him to tell us. As for how we worked together in the African Development Bank, she was always a star in the bank and when she went to the Ivorian government. And then you have Ibrahim, who has done an excellent job in NEPAD. So very good to be here with these people. Again, let me begin by also congratulating my friend President Yusufu for getting the prize. Well done, sir. President Yusufu and I are serving on a panel on the Sahel, a panel set up by the United Nations, African Union, ECOWAS, and the G5 Sahel to figure out how to fix this region of almost 100 million people. And if you add the Sudan, that is over 140 million people. And believe me, the president is doing a very good job there to trying to figure out solutions. You know, poverty begins by fixing stability, peace and stability. And so the president, by the trust he has received, I think it's an encouragement to him to get this done. So thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, I have just a few points. Everything has been said. But number one, going by what my friend Musa Faki said about the narrative. In 2008, when I was still president of the African Development Bank, during the global financial crisis, people come to me asking me, or rather telling me almost conclusively, that Africa will be the continent to suffer the most from the financial crisis. All right? Well, but when I look at the numbers, at the status of our banks, I just could not understand that. Because we are not exposed to the toxic products. Our banks are very well regulated. The ratios look okay to me. Okay? So I did not see that we are going to have a financial crisis. We could have an economic aftermath of lower exports, but there's no crisis to our banks. But the assumption out there was that Africa will be the one to suffer the most. And believe me, nothing happened, and we're still here. So, as Musa was saying, the idea that for every problem in the world, Africa is the automatic next victim is almost an assumed truth. And I think the president was saying yesterday, we really have to try and work it out ourselves. Accept the self-inflicted problems we do, but also tell our own story in our own way. Not by hiding things we should fix, by telling the story the way we should tell it. So that was the first point. My second point, since you asked me about the African Union, Musa is here, so he can speak for himself. I want to say that African Union is not something which is in Addis Ababa. African Union is every one of us in this room and outside. It is our project. We have to make it work. It has got its imperfections, like any other organization. But we have to work together to fix it, especially the young people, 70% of this continent. And I do believe that fixing it begins by fixing the issue President Yusuf is trying to deal with, peace and security, fixing the issues of integration. You know, when the countries of Africa began the march to independence in the 60s, there were about 30 countries, or thereabout. And they set up the Organization of African Unity. They had 3 agendas. Agenda number 1, be careful with the borders. Because the borders colonialists left us, it really don't make sense. All right? But the leader said, please keep them. They were there. Although I must add on this one, that some of the younger leaders today don't understand the implications of that decision. Because the idea was keep the borders, but accept the responsibility of those borders. There is a video going around which I want everyone to see. A former president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Nyerere, saying, look, the Maasai nation was cut by half. Some in Kenya, others in Tanzania. And he says, I'm quoting him, Just imagine if President Moi woke up one day and said, the Maasais of Kenya are not Kenyans, they should go to Tanzania. But they're not Tanzanians, they're Kenyans. Or if the president of Tanzania said, no, the Maasais of Tanzania should go to Kenya, but they're not Kenyans, they are Maasais of Kenya and of Tanzania. There are some leaders on this continent who don't understand that the decision to keep the borders came with responsibilities to respect, to protect, to treat everyone equally in the borders. I was teasing my friend, President Yusufu. Well, sorry, President, you and I were discussing. President belongs to an ethnic group called the Hausas. These are one of the biggest tribes in West Africa. The Hausas are in Nigeria, his country, they're in Nigeria. Just imagine if President Yusuf woke up one day and said the Hausas of Nigeria should go to Nigeria. But they're not Nigerians. All right? This is one of the problems causing issues in Africa. Leaders said keep the borders, but accept the responsibility of those borders. Because if you don't, there are consequences. The second thing was about liberation of the continent. Because there were only 32 countries which were free at the time. And those countries who are free worked very hard to help the rest of the continent free itself. And that was completed in 1994 with South Africa. Okay. Then there was a third agenda, and the one I want to comment last. It was about, okay, now economic liberation. And that begins by integration. Now, integration is never easy. Talk to Europeans. They're still working about it. It's never easy. But it is a project we have to work on. Again, as a consequence of accepting the borders, we have accepted now to work together. And one way Africa will exercise its agency in the world is to accept that although those borders are meaningless, let us integrate our economies. Let us ensure that we harmonize our policies. And then our voice in the world will be amplified. The African Union we have today, I'm saying this under the control of Musa, is an imperfect product of a debate which took place in the 90s and 2000. It went this way. There are those who said, we want a United States of Africa. That was led by Muammar Gaddafi. We want the United States of Africa. Okay. A leader ahead of his time. Then there are those who said, yes, we believe in the United Africa, but not in the United States of Africa. We'll get there one day, but it will take time. Frankly, Musa will tell me, I think there was a third group which was okay with the status quo. So what we have now in the African Union is a result of that debate which tried to compromise between the three groups. And therefore, our voice in the world today, our role in the world today, is a reflection of that debate which reached that compromise. So, in many issues in the world, we are treated as junior partners. There is a meeting in Brussels, meeting in Washington, meeting somewhere about Africa. Have you ever seen a meeting in Africa about India? All right? Have you ever seen a meeting here about Turkey? There are meetings everywhere about Africa. But for heaven's sake, why? It should be here, we are here. So, but that junior partnership is partly self-inflicted, partly as a result of inequities in the international system. And I want to end by saying that my other president is here, President Ellen of Liberia. She gave me an honor to sit on a panel she has been chairing, led by United Nations, on multilateralism. We struggled very hard, but I leave the president to speak for herself. We spent months figuring out, but what could be Africa's place in this new world order? And Our conclusion, President, I hope I'm reflecting your views correctly, was really to bring to what my friend Pascal Ami likes always to refer to as how do you balance effectiveness, i.e. ability to resolve issues, with legitimacy, ensuring that everybody, every voice is on the table. These are not opposites, both are needed. So we're often presented with international financial institutions, very effective sometimes. I led one. But then sometimes you wonder about legitimacy. Where is it? Where is the voice of everybody on the table? That voice, we have to work for it. We have to earn it by keeping our continent stable, peaceful, integrated, and doing things we have to do, like what the foundation is promoting. That is my modest contribution. But again, I'm very happy to be with my three friends on this panel, and I agree with everything they have said.
Okay. Thank you. For us to have a seat at the table, we have to work for it, and work for it through stability, regional integration, and having a peaceful continent. I'm now going to open the floor to questions, but before I do, I'd like to have a comment from Mr. Jeremy Ntjap, who is the Vice President of FIFPro and the President of FIFPro Africa Division. And the question we all have for you is, we have 514 African players in 11 European major football leagues. How can we ensure that we retain more African players to play for us? Instead of cheering for France, well, indeed, we're really cheering for the African continent.
That's a good one.
Thank you for this question. Good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity first to thank Mo Ibrahim Foundation for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here in such of important conference. African football is a stronger resources of African soft power. Most of our footballers play in big league over the world. This is a very big problem. They are our asset. I myself, I play for Real Madrid, for Chelsea. African players, they leave African in such of young age. Why? Because the poor working condition, the non-respect of their contract. That's the bigger problem. We, in FIFPro, we are there to fight for their right, fight for their interests, fight for the improvement of the working condition, so that those young players can play in Africa to inspire the young generation. When you think of world in Africa, Africa in the world, we want people to look at us like inspiration and good governance, not for asset to take back to Europe. This is what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njita. We are now open to questions. There's one question there. I'm going to try to be as equitable as I can. Another one there. There's one there. Is anybody with the mics? Yes, there's one there. There's another there, Fadzai. Yes, sir. And we are running out of time, so we're going to have to take them short and sweet. And please do not be like Kenyans who give a comment instead of asking a question. This is strictly for questions. Thank you.
The mic.
I don't know if you can hear me. To me, Africa's place in the world is very clear. We are a net provider of natural and human resources to the global economy, as well as ecosystem services. So my question is, because I'm not an economist, why do our resources remain so underpriced? How can we exact a fair price for them? And why does this remain a taboo subject? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another one.
Thank you so much. My name is Lusungu Kacheche, and I work with Oxfam. My question is around what would be the maybe 3 key priorities that as Africa we can focus on so that we are an equal partner with our development partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a question here.
Thank you very much. My name is John Kichui. I think we know the problems for Africa, but I think the biggest challenge has been how do we exercise the plenty of the latent assets that exist on this continent. And I think for me, that's probably what I would like to hear from the panel. And I say that because despite everything that the panels have said, which is really, really great, we are a very colonized continent. We are here discussing African issues. We are using the colonial language. We can't even use our own language. We are all educated in the Western models of thinking and Western frames. We try to impose the Western democratic models on the continent. We try to practice the industrial, agricultural models of agriculture imported from the West on the African continent. How do we practically move forward from this great talk to decolonizing the world the way it is, to decolonizing Africa? How do we have this forum in 2024 in an African language so that foreigners use interpretation, then we Africans use the interpretation? Thank you.
Shukran. Ndugu yangu amesema anataka tuongee kwa lugha ya Kiswahili ama lugha ya taifa ya nchi yako. Yes, Madam Passaris.
Thank you. My name is Esther Passaris. I'm the Member of Parliament for Nairobi County, and I'd like to welcome all of you to Nairobi. My question is family planning. I know we look at our population as a huge resource, but it's also dangerous. Why are we not able to talk family planning? Thank you.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa. There was a question here, Fadzai. It's the last question I'll be taking.
My name is Fadzai Mahere. I'm from Zimbabwe. I heard the beautiful speeches about improving the narrative on Africa. My question is, and this is for the wider world, so we improve our standing in the world. My question to the panel and to all the esteemed leaders here today is, how do we improve the narrative for the African citizen? So that we're not just trying to look good to Europe and to China and to Russia, but we look good to the common man and woman in the African context. You can't have a country like Zimbabwe suffering from 49% extreme poverty, 2.2 billion lost to illicit financial flows every year, and then you say, no, talk positively about everything. We want to speak well about the African context, but how do we ensure the narrative matches our lived reality and that is a positive one?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Hafu to begin answering the first questions around resources, but also the assets that we have. How can we amplify that across the continent?
Yeah, thank you for this great question. Being from Côte d'Ivoire, one of, I think, my most disappointing, or I think one thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that we're the largest exporter of cocoa. But when we think about that industry, we're only, as Dr. Kabaruka said so well, a participant. We're invited to discussions rather than leading those discussions. And I think the key issue that has to do with it is the fact that we're not transforming. We're exporting raw cocoa. Think of it as, you know, anything in life. When you're exporting it not at its finest value, of course, it doesn't have as much value or impact as, you know, refined chocolate from Switzerland or Belgium, right? So the key for us is really understanding the value that our products have the policies that will really enable the transformation, have the infrastructure, really, because to go from cocoa to chocolate, it's quite an extensive process, right? And when we talked about colonization, we've been just nurtured to just grow the beans and then ship them, and then someone else will take care of the transformation. So for me, I think we're pressed by times. The most important thing is the fact that we are just not transforming and also branding. The last thing I wanted to say is when you brand items as luxury good, the price almost triple or goes 10 times X, right? So how do we brand our products to define them as quality products so that when we export them, they have the value that they need to have? Was that the only question you wanted?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Kaberuka, we have, thank you. Around the question on decolonizing Africa and ensuring that we take center stage with our own voice and show up for ourselves authentically, what are some of the practical, tangible steps we can take as a continent?
Thank you. Time is limited, so let me answer just with one sentence each. Number one, in the documents we have here from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, there is something I don't agree with more, and I want to say this. I don't think we should always discuss Africa as simply a source of raw materials. No. I would like us to change the narrative to Africa as an opportunity for the rest of the world to grow their economies. If Europe wants to have political stability, economic growth in the future, they need to look to Africa for that to happen. We're not simply a place you come to get copper and cobalt and timber and wood and all this. Of course, we have them. But that's not how we should define ourselves. We're an opportunity for ourselves and the rest of the world. So more, there's a comment I'm making for you. Number two, colonization. Look, America was colonized by a small island in North Atlantic called the UK, all right? America liberated itself. Now it is a superpower. China was occupied, all right? Now it is the second superpower. So the issue is not the history of colonization. It's what you do after you are decolonized. And that answers the answer from my sister in Zimbabwe. We have to accept some of the self-inflicted wounds. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, look, we could have done this differently. All right? You can't simply blame colonial powers who left 70 years ago for the wounds you inflict yourself today. So that is very important. Colonization, we can write history, all right? But the most important thing is what have we done with the independence which we have?
Fantastic. Okay.
Now, we have no time to develop this. More gave us just half an hour, it's fine. And now, my last point is about family planning, from my sister here. We have to be careful here. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in the 70s, I think, looked at the population of India differently, and they started a program of family planning. It didn't work very well. I don't have time to go into that. But anyway, today, I think this month, India will surpass China as the most populous country in the world. But there's something India did which many countries have not done, and which we have an opportunity to do. Demographers have something called the demographic transition, time when you have got fewer babies, fewer retired people, and a very large labor force. But that labor force is used only if you invest in it, if you invest in educational outcomes. The Indians did that quite well. I think what we need to do, my sister, is that rather than worry about family planning, i.e. preventing more people, invest in the people today. We need to make sure that our education systems provide the skills, the learning outcomes we need for the future. Over time, the demographic transitions happen. As more women go to school, as health conditions improve, it happens. It will happen. But I think for me, the big issue is not family planning, preventing something happening. It's investing in their human capital. And I think many of our countries are entering what I would maybe think is stage 3 of the transition. We've got very few pensioners. We have got babies increasing, but maybe not like before. In Niger, the present country is still about 4%, which is very high. But where I think I disagree with demographers in the Western world, they think that dependents are only pensioners and babies. In fact, in many of our countries, there are many dependents in the labor force because there are no jobs for them, all right? And for me, that is a big issue. Invest in education, invest in skills, invest in learning outcomes. We worry too much about natural resources, things you inherited, copper, cobalt, oil and gas. Those things come and go. The thing you have to invest in today is in our education, in our young people. This is what I will do, all right? The rest, education, health outcomes, has a way of taking care of that. But that is my 2 pence.
Can I add one quick thing on family planning really quick?
Time is up. As you could see, we could have been here longer, but as you could see, time is not on our side. Thank you for being with us today. Allow me to ask you all to stand and give a round of applause to our wonderful audience. His Excellency Mayaki, His Excellency Vice President, Mr. Kaberuka, and Hafa Toure. Thank you very much.